So often when I'm reading harem manga, I find the author seems to have decided, to hell with writing an actual story, I'll just create as many implausible ecchi scenes as possible with 5 different girls, a dorky guy, and the readers will love it. Sadly enough, this seems to be a reasonably successful formula for making money, so this type of story has propagated like a stupid internet meme. Today, I'll be reviewing Rosario no Vampire, a story that started out as one of the most generic stories to follow this formula, but actually developed a pretty decent plot in its quote-unquote second season. I don't exactly get how manga has seasons, but I'm getting sidetracked. Anyways, on with the review. Our story starts out with Sukune Aono, a kid who's completely average in every way. Since apparently average marks aren't enough to get you into the magical place known as Japanese high school, he instead ends up enrolling in the sketchy Yukai Academy, which is actually a genuine magical high school for monsters. You might think that being the only human in a school full of monsters would be something of an unfortunate experience for Sukune, but apparently monster chicks dig humans, so he soon develops his own harem. Foremost among this harem is a certain rosary-wearing vampire called Mocha. If the rosary gets taken off her, she gets an alternate personality and super vampire abilities, which leads us to the basis of all the story arcs in the first half of the story. Sukune gets into trouble, takes rosary off Mocha, and she beats the living daylights out of whoever's causing the problem. Luckily, later in the story they actually come across some enemies that can't be defeated by rosary removal, in the form of an evil organization called Fairy Tail. No relation to Natsurin, coincidentally. And that's where the story starts to get interesting. Probably the most important part of any harem story is developing the characters and their relationships. If you don't find yourself cheering for at least one of the heroines, or heroes for a reverse harem, to end up with the protagonist, then the whole thing completely falls apart. Rosario does this perhaps a bit too well, as I found myself rooting for multiple heroines, and sadly, polygamy probably isn't an option. Our heroines include among their count the aforementioned vampire Mocha, who is sweet and smart, but also slightly ditzy, Kurunu, a clingy succubus, Yukari, a witch and the token lolly of the series, Mizwar, a stalker snow fairy, and lastly Ruby, a masochist witch. None of these characters stand out as being mind-blowingly original, but they're well enough constructed to be both relatable and likable. Sukune, on the other hand, is pretty darn boring. He fits the archetype of the slightly dopey nice guy perfectly, and could easily be exchanged with a couple other shonen protagonists I can think of. That being said, he rarely makes a complete ass of himself, like some protagonists do, and later in the series he actually starts to get kind of cool. So the first couple chapters of the story are kind of trash. They're unoriginal, poorly written, and even the artwork is sketchy. I honestly have no clue why I kept on reading the series after getting through the first of them. Now that that's been said, let's talk about the rest of the series. Rosario no Vampire seems to have taken the idea, everything's good in moderation, to heart, and as a result it's a solid series. There's enough ecchi scenes and slapstick humor to be appreciable, but stops rather short of giving us the constant parade of them that you get in series like Love Hina or Aso no Yochi. Likewise, it has a fair number of fight scenes, but none of the never-ending style that you get in Naruto or Bleach. Lastly, the story does a good job developing character relations while also minimizing the number of angst moments. I can think of a couple of stories that could learn a lot from this last one. The result is that all of these elements meld well together, and it never feels like one is benefiting at the expense of the others. I can't think of a point reading this series where I wasn't enjoying it. First few chapters aside, of course. To be honest, I think that harem is probably one of the more trashy genres in anime and manga, but Rosario no Vampire certainly is not. As much as I criticize its beginning, it's nice to have a series that gets better as it goes on, rather than one that goes down the drain. And also, it's just fun to read, so yeah. For my personal enjoyment, I give Rosario no Vampire an 8 out of 10. And for its overall quality of writing, I give it a 7 out of 10. If you've already read this series and are you looking for something similar, I would recommend Mahu Sensei Negima, the tale of a miniature mage trying to teach a class of middle school girls. It's slightly less consistent than Rosario, but certainly worth a read if you're into fantasy and the harem genre. Anyways, thanks for listening. Cheers!